The morning my husband called me from his brother's lawyer's office, I was in the kitchen making oatmeal. 38 years of marriage, and that's where I was standing at the same stove, in the same kitchen, wearing the same cotton apron I'd had since our youngest was in diapers. I remember thinking the oatmeal needed more cinnamon, and then my phone rang, and everything I thought I knew about my life stopped making sense. Dorothy. His voice was different, flat, like he was reading from a script someone else had written. I need you to listen carefully. Gerald left me everything. The property in Vermont, the investment accounts, all of it. We're talking about a little over $3 million. I set down the wooden spoon. That's wonderful news, I said slowly. Gerald was my husband's older brother. He'd never married, never had children. He and my husband had grown close again in recent years after a long estrangement. I knew my husband had been named in the will. I just didn't know what that meant yet, not for us, not for me. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he continued. Dorothy, I want a divorce. I need you to start looking for an apartment. I'll give you 60 days to find somewhere. The oatmeal started to bubble and hiss on the stove. I turned off the burner. You want me to leave our home, I said. Not a question. Just the words. Out loud, because I needed to hear them in my own voice to believe them. The house is in my name. You know that. It always has been. I did know that. We'd bought it that way, 22 years ago. Because his credit score was better at the time, and the mortgage rate was lower under his name alone. I had signed the paperwork without thinking twice. I was his wife. What was his was mine. That's what I believed. I think you should call your daughter, he said. I'll have my attorney reach out next week. And then he hung up. I stood in my kitchen for a long time. The oatmeal was still steaming in the pot. Outside, the neighbor's dog was barking at something in the yard. The world was completely ordinary, and I was standing in the middle of it, feeling like the floor had opened beneath my feet. I want to tell you something about my husband, about the man I married when I was 26 years old. He was the kind of man who remembered your coffee order and held doors open and cried at his mother's funeral without being ashamed of it. He coached Little League for 11 years, even when our own son had aged out of the program. He was not a cruel man, or at least I had never seen him be one, but money does something to people. I had seen it happen to others and told myself it would never happen to us. I was wrong. We had built everything together. I taught 4th grade for 31 years in the Portland public school system. I was not a woman who stayed home. I worked. I contributed. I paid half the grocery bills and more than half the utility bills in the years when his sales commissions were low. I had put my name on nothing because I had trusted him completely. That trust, I would come to understand, was the most expensive mistake I ever made. Our daughter, Cassie, drove over within an hour of me calling her. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and held my hands, and I watched her try to find the right words. She was 34, practical in the way that people who love you deeply sometimes have to be. Mom, she said carefully, do not move anything out of this house. Do you hear me? Not a single box. I told her I hadn't. Good. And don't sign anything. Promise me. I promised. I'm going to call someone, she said. A friend from law school. She does family law. Her name is Susan Hartley. And she is very, very good. I had never hired an attorney in my life. I had never needed one. I had lived 63 years in a kind of faith that problems could be worked out between people who loved each other. That honesty was enough. That fairness was something you could count on. I was about to get a very different kind of education. Susan Hartley's office was on the 3rd floor of a building downtown, with large windows and a view of the river. She was in her early 50s. With close-cropped natural hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and she had a way of listening that made you feel like every word you said was being cataloged and stored, and would be used precisely when it needed to be. I told her everything. The phone call. The house in his name. The 38 years. The fact that I had been working and contributing since before our children were born. She let me finish. Then, she opened a legal pad and uncapped her pen. "Mrs. Calloway," she said, "I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to be as specific as you can." "Can you do that?" I told her I could. "During your marriage, did you have income of your own?" "Yes." "Teacher's salary." 31 years. "Did that income go into joint accounts?" "Some of it." "We also each had individual accounts." "Did you ever contribute to household expenses, mortgage, utilities, repairs, anything related to the home from your personal income?" I thought about the new roof in 2019, the kitchen renovation in 2014, the furnace replacement 3 winters ago. My name wasn't on the house, but my money was in every wall of it. "Yes," I said. Significantly, she nodded and kept writing. "Now," she said, "the inheritance. Do you know the details? When did Gerald pass away?" 6 weeks ago. "And your husband was named sole beneficiary?" "That's what he told me." "Mrs. Calloway, in the state of Oregon, inheritances are generally considered separate property, meaning they belong to the person who inherited them, not to the marriage. However," she paused. "However, there are circumstances that complicate that significantly. If inherited funds are commingled with marital assets, if they're deposited into joint accounts, if they're used to pay joint expenses at that point, the line blurs considerably." I thought about the weeks since Gerald's death. My husband had been quieter than usual, spending more time on the phone. I had assumed it was grief. Now, I wasn't sure. "He hasn't told me anything about the accounts," I said. "I don't know where the money is." "That's actually fairly common," Susan said, without a hint of surprise. "What I'd like to do is file immediately for divorce on your behalf and simultaneously request full financial disclosure. Every account, every asset, every transaction since the date of Gerald's death. We will want to know if any of that money has already moved." Something about the way she said it, the steadiness, the complete lack of alarm, made me feel the first small flicker of something I hadn't felt since that phone call. Not hope exactly, more like the sense that I was not entirely without options. "There's something else," I said. "The house. He told me it's in his name. He told me I need to leave." Susan looked at me over the rim of her reading glasses. "Do you want to leave?" "No," I said. "I've lived there for 22 years. My garden is there. My daughter grew up there." "Then don't," she said simply. "He cannot legally compel you to vacate the marital home during divorce proceedings. You have every right to remain in that house until a court says otherwise. And given your financial contributions to that property over more than 2 decades, you may have significantly more claim to it than his name on the deed suggests." I drove home and sat in my driveway for a while before going inside. The house looked exactly the same as it always had: the white shutters, the hydrangeas along the front walk that I had planted the summer our son went off to college. I had chosen this house. I had loved this house. I had poured money and care and 30 years of weekends into this house. I went inside, and I did not pack a single box. My husband called again 3 days later. He had retained an attorney of his own, a man named Fletcher, apparently quite experienced, according to my husband's slightly too casual mention of his reputation. I listened to him explain that he expected me to be reasonable, that 60 days was more than sufficient time, that he wanted this to go smoothly. "I'm not leaving," I told him. "Silence. Dorothy. I've retained an attorney," I said. "Her name is Susan Hartley. Please have Mr. Fletcher contact her directly. I won't be discussing the details of our divorce with you personally going forward." I hung up. I want to tell you that I felt powerful in that moment. I didn't, not exactly. I felt terrified and exhausted and profoundly sad. But I felt something else too, underneath all of that, something that had been quiet for a very long time, a kind of clarity, the sense that I was finally, at 63 years old, refusing to make myself smaller to make someone else more comfortable. The financial disclosure process took several weeks. Susan had warned me it might. During that time, I stayed in the house, tended my garden, had dinner with Cassie every Sunday, and tried to understand what my life might look like on the other side of all of this. What the disclosure revealed was instructive. My husband had moved quickly after Gerald's death. Within 2 weeks of the estate being settled, a significant portion of the inherited funds had been deposited into an account that, until that moment, had been a joint savings account. One we had held together for 16 years. One both our names were on, one into which we had both contributed over the course of our marriage. He had deposited nearly $800,000 into that account before quietly opening a new individual account and transferring it out again. It was a brief window, just long enough to constitute commingling under Oregon law. Susan explained it to me at our third meeting. Her tone measured. Her eyes, watching my face carefully as she spoke. He may not have realized what he was doing, she said. Or he may have been moving money quickly and not thought through the legal implications. Either way, the moment those funds touched a joint marital account, the argument that they were entirely separate property became significantly harder to make. I thought about what my husband had said on the phone that first day. He had sounded so certain, so sure that the money was his, the house was his, that I would simply gather my things and go. He had been married to me for 38 years and apparently had not thought to wonder whether I might fight back. What about the house? I asked. Susan folded her hands on the desk. We've been building that case as well. You have bank records showing direct contributions from your personal account to the mortgage in at least 11 separate years. You have receipts for the roof, for the kitchen renovation, for the HVAC system. We have documentation showing that your income contributed materially to the upkeep and improvement of that property over more than 2 decades. She paused. The house being in his name does not mean the house is entirely his. Equitable distribution accounts for contribution, not just title. I thought about the roof. The summer I had dipped into my own savings to cover it because we were between commissions and the leak was getting worse. I had not thought of it as an investment. I had thought of it as what you do when you are part of a family and the roof is leaking. How does this end? I asked her. That depends on how cooperative his side chooses to be, she said. But I'll tell you this. The position we're in is considerably stronger than most people would expect, given that the house was in his name and the inheritance was his brother's. He had certain assumptions about how this would go. Those assumptions were not well-founded. The mediation took place on a Tuesday in February, in a conference room with too bright lighting and a plate of pastries that nobody touched. My husband sat across the table from me for the first time since the phone call. He looked older than I remembered, which I supposed was natural. We were both older than we used to be. He did not meet my eyes. Mr. Fletcher was smooth and professional, and spent the first 30 minutes explaining what he called his client's very reasonable position. Susan waited until he was finished. Then she laid out ours. I watched Mr. Fletcher's expression shift as Susan walked through the commingling documentation. I watched my husband's jaw tighten when she placed the bank records on the table, the ones showing his deposit of estate funds into our joint account. I watched him look at Fletcher, and I watched Fletcher give the smallest, almost imperceptible shake of his head. They asked for a recess. When we reconvened an hour later, the tone was different. The final settlement took another 6 weeks to negotiate fully. What I can tell you is this: I kept the house. The deed was transferred into my name alone as part of the agreement. I received a significant share of the marital assets we had accumulated together over 38 years, calculated fairly and documented completely. A portion of the inherited funds, given the commingling, was also included in the marital estate for distribution. I did not get everything. I want to be honest about that. Divorce is not a fairy tale, and the law is not a vending machine where you put in righteousness and get out perfect outcomes. But I got enough. More than enough to build something real. The day the paperwork was finalized, I drove home and sat in my driveway again, just like I had months before. The hydrangeas were starting to bud. The white shutters needed repainting, they always did, every few years. And now that job would fall entirely to me to arrange. I found I didn't mind. Cassie came over that evening and we ordered Thai food and sat on the back porch until it got too cold. And she told me she was proud of me. And I told her I was proud of me too, which is not something I had said out loud very often in 63 years of living. There are things I know now that I wish I had known earlier. I know that love and legal protection are not the same thing, and that trusting someone completely does not mean making yourself legally invisible. I know that the name on a deed is not the whole story of who built a home. I know that it is possible, at 63, to learn how to fight for yourself not with anger, not with drama, but with paperwork and patience, and a very good attorney. I also know this. The morning my husband called me from that lawyer's office, I was making oatmeal in my kitchen, and the only thing I added was a little more cinnamon. I am still in that kitchen. The stove is still the same. The apron is still the same. And the house finally, officially, completely is mine. If you're going through something like this, or you know someone who is, I hope this story reminds you of something important. Staying calm is not the same as giving up. Knowing your rights is not the same as being difficult. And walking away from a marriage does not have to mean walking away from everything you spent a lifetime building. Thank you for being here with me today. If this story meant something to you, please let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. You never know who might be standing in their kitchen right now, wondering what they're allowed to keep.